I always believed trust was the quiet thread holding our marriage together. 18 years, 2 kids, a life we built from scratch. But lately, I've come to realize that what you don't know can shake everything you thought was solid. It started small, almost laughable, but what I recently uncovered, that changed everything, and now I can't unsee it. My name's Mark, and my wife, Jessica, has always been the more detail-oriented one in the relationship. She's an accountant by profession, someone who color codes spreadsheets for fun and checks the credit card balance more often than I check my phone. I've always appreciated that about her. She's sharp, careful, and responsible, and I've trusted her to handle the books without thinking twice. So when I first noticed that Jessica would casually mention where I'd stopped for lunch during the day, I didn't think much of it. "So you went to Big Mike's again today?" she'd say, a knowing smile on her face. It was almost funny, like she had a sixth sense for my fast food cravings. Eventually, I realized she was getting transaction alerts on her phone every time I swiped the credit card. No big deal, right? We'd had issues with fraud in the past, and this just felt like a smart safety measure. Maybe it would have been nice if she had told me first, but it didn't feel malicious. Just practical. That's Jessica in a nutshell. Looking back now, I think that was the first breadcrumb. A little thing that I waved off because we're a team. I didn't mind her knowing where I spent $11.49 on lunch. I had nothing to hide, and if anything, I admired her vigilance. Still, part of me wishes she'd just said something, been upfront about it. It's the little things that add up. Then came the next layer, our daughter, Emma. She turned 17 last year and finally got her license. Like any parent, I was a mix of proud and terrified. Jessica, being who she is, wasted no time installing a tracking app, Life 360, on Emma's phone. Only she did it without telling her. That rubbed me the wrong way. I voiced my concerns, brought up the ethics of tracking our daughter without her consent. Jessica brushed it off, saying it was necessary for safety, and after a few long talks, I reluctantly agreed. Teenagers take risks. Maybe this was just one of those uncomfortable parental calls you have to make. We promised not to tell Emma. Looking back, I regret agreeing to that. It set the precedent. If it's for the greater good, a little secrecy is okay. Jessica's logic made sense on the surface, but something about it unsettled me. But even then, I never thought twice about Jessica and privacy, my privacy. I assumed our relationship, while not perfect, was rooted in mutual respect. I wasn't checking her phone, her emails, or tracking her location. I never wanted to. That's not love, that's control. Or so I thought. What I didn't realize at the time was that Jessica wasn't just managing finances or keeping our daughter safe. She was getting comfortable with secrecy, with quietly moving past boundaries without discussion. And I blindly trusting, maybe even a little lazy, let her. If I'm being honest, I think I wanted to believe we were still those people who talked about everything, who respected each other's space without needing rules. But this quiet monitoring, these little decisions she made without me, they were small cracks forming in something I thought was solid. And I didn't even know it was only the beginning. It wasn't until my business trip last month that the cracks became something I couldn't ignore. Jessica had asked me to take some photos for her niece's school project, random shots of city architecture and public art where I was staying. I didn't think twice. I snapped the pictures in between meetings, even took some extra shots just in case, planning to send them once I got home. It was a small favor, something I'd done a dozen times before. The day after I got back, I casually mentioned that I needed to send the photos to her sister. That's when Jessica said something that stopped me cold. "Oh, I already did." I paused. "Wait, when did you borrow my phone?" I wasn't angry, just confused. I don't lock my phone. I've never felt the need to. But the idea of her going into it without asking still struck me as odd. I expected her to say she'd grabbed it while I was in the shower, or maybe when I was unpacking. But instead, her face shifted, eyes darting, mouth tightening. That look, it was the kind of expression you give when you realize you've said something you shouldn't have. I watched her carefully. "Did you go into my Google Photos?" I asked, already bracing. She hesitated, then nodded. My heart sank. How? She admitted that a while back, she didn't say exactly when, she went into my phone and gave herself automatic access to my Google Photos account. She had full access to every photo I took, automatically. No need to borrow my phone. No need to even ask. She said she was sorry, that she knew it was wrong, that she should have asked for permission. But all I could hear was should have. She didn't. She made a choice, and she kept it quiet. I sat there in silence, the kind that feels louder than any argument. Because it wasn't just about photos. It was the principle, the quiet decision, the secrecy. I thought about all the times she had asked me to hand her the phone to send herself pictures. Christmas morning, a family picnic in October, Emma's birthday. She had pretended to need my phone. Pretended, knowing full well she already had the pictures. And that's when the full weight of it hit me. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was deliberate. She'd gone out of her way to make sure I didn't realize what she had done. And that part hurt more than anything. Not the access itself. I honestly would have said yes if she had just asked. But the deception. The conscious effort to keep me in the dark. I felt stupid. Exposed. Like I'd been living in a version of my marriage that she no longer shared. We argued, of course. She kept saying it was about convenience. That it saved time. That she didn't want to bother me while I was busy. But none of that mattered anymore. Not when I could see she had created a system that let her look into parts of my life while pretending not to. It wasn't even about the photos anymore. It was the principle, the erosion of trust, the calculated cover-ups. I walked out of that room with a knot in my stomach I couldn't untie. For the first time in 18 years, I wasn't sure I knew who I had married. Or worse, maybe I did, and I just didn't want to see it before. And in the quiet of that realization, a new fear settled in. If she could lie about something so small, what else had she hidden from me? I was no longer asking out of curiosity. I was asking because I was scared of the answer. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake in the dark beside her, staring at the ceiling while Jessica breathed evenly next to me, like everything was fine. Like there wasn't this massive shift happening inside me. My mind kept circling the same question. If she could lie about that, what else could she lie about? It wasn't paranoia. It was grief. I felt like I had lost something I hadn't even realized was fragile. It was never about needing total privacy. I've never kept secrets from her. But there's a difference between openness and surveillance, between trust and quiet control. And now that seed of doubt was growing roots. The next morning, I sat in my car outside the house for a long time before going inside. Part of me didn't want to face her again. But when I walked through the door, she was already in the kitchen, acting like nothing had happened. Making coffee, asking about my meetings. Just normal. I couldn't take it. I told her I needed to talk, and this time I didn't hold back. I confronted her, calmly at first, but my voice shook more with each sentence. I told her I had found the email. Yes, the one from Halloween. The one she never mentioned. The one that showed she'd set up the photo sharing without telling me. That part caught her off guard. She tried to play innocent, said she forgot about it, that she didn't think it was a big deal. I wasn't buying it anymore. I asked her, point blank, why she kept pretending to need my phone to send herself pictures when she already had access. Her face changed again. That mask of confidence slipped for just a second, and then she admitted it, finally admitted it. She knew she had gone too far. She knew it would have upset me if I found out, so she doubled down. Kept borrowing my phone to keep the illusion alive. On Christmas morning, on Emma's birthday, at our anniversary dinner. All those moments when I thought she was just sending herself a few sweet memories. Those were calculated moves to maintain a lie. I don't know how to describe what I felt right then. It wasn't just betrayal. It was disbelief. Anger, yes, but also something more hollow. Like watching a wall you'd leaned on your whole life slowly crumble beneath your hands. I had always believed, maybe foolishly, that we were past this kind of thing. That we had matured into something unshakable. Turns out, I was the only one living in that version of our marriage. Jessica didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stood there and said, I have no excuse. I know I messed up. There was sincerity in her voice, but it didn't reach me. Not this time. I told her if she had just asked, I would have said yes. It wasn't about the photos. It never really was. It was about the choice to hide, to manipulate, to lie by omission, and then lie by action. She didn't try to argue, just nodded, eyes glassy, but still silent. I grabbed my keys and walked out. Not because I was leaving for good. Not yet, anyway. But because I needed to breathe. To be away from the suffocating weight of pretending things could just snap back to normal. They couldn't. Not after this. And somewhere deep in my chest, a harder truth began to settle in. Forgiveness might be possible, but things would never go back to how they were. Because now I knew the truth, she chose to lie to me. And knowing that changed everything. I drove aimlessly for a while that afternoon. No music. No destination. Just the quiet hum of the engine and my own thoughts looping on repeat. My hands clenched the steering wheel a little too tight, and my jaw ached from being locked for too long. It was like my body was trying to keep it together while my mind unraveled. What hurt the most wasn't the access to my photos. It wasn't the tracking apps or the subtle control. It was the fact that the woman I had built a life with, a woman I loved, could look me in the eye and keep something like this from me. Over and over again. Not one mistake. A pattern. This realization clawed at my gut. For 18 years, I've been the kind of husband who didn't snoop, didn't pry. I didn't ask for passwords. I never went through her phone. Not because I was naive, but because I respected her space, just like I assumed she respected mine. I thought that was the foundation we stood on. Turns out, she'd been walking through doors in our relationship that I didn't even know were open. And then, she'd turned around and quietly locked them behind her. When I finally pulled back into the driveway that evening, I still didn't know what I was going to say. But the moment I stepped through the front door, Emma greeted me from the couch. She gave me a casual, "Hey, Dad," without looking up from her phone. Something about the normalcy of it all hit me like a punch to the chest. This house, the one we built together, is filled with people I love. That's what made all of this so complicated. I needed clarity, and I needed to start somewhere. So, later that night, I sat down with Emma. I didn't want to drag her into the middle of this, but I also needed to know the truth, especially about the Life 360 app. Jessica and I had agreed to keep it from her originally, and that decision had always sat awkwardly with me. To my surprise, Emma told me she didn't know about the tracking. Her mom had told her a few months ago, and apparently, she was okay with it. "Honestly, I don't care," she shrugged. "It's not like I'm sneaking around. Plus, it helps if I break down or something." That brought some small relief, but also something else, sadness. Jessica had told Emma the truth eventually. She had trusted our daughter with that information, but not me. Why? Why did she feel safe enough to come clean to our teenager, but not to her husband? I didn't ask Jessica that night. We barely spoke. I could feel her watching me from across the room, waiting for a sign that I'd cooled down, that maybe we could brush this aside and just move forward. But I couldn't give her that, not yet. I was still stuck on the deception. On Christmas morning, when she smiled and asked to borrow my phone. On Halloween, when she quietly flipped a switch on my account without so much as a word. On the countless little moments where she could have just been honest, but chose not to be. The truth is, I didn't know what scared me more, the fact that she crossed that line, or the fact that she was so good at pretending she hadn't. And I began to wonder, how many other lines had I missed? That night, after Emma went to bed and the house fell into that quiet lull between exhaustion and insomnia, Jessica approached me. She didn't say anything at first. Just sat beside me on the couch, a little too carefully, like she was afraid she might break whatever invisible line now sat between us. Her eyes were red, but she hadn't been crying. Not recently, anyway. "I know I messed up," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say it again." I didn't respond right away. I was tired, not just physically, but deep in my bones. Tired of holding back everything I wanted to say, afraid that once I started, I wouldn't be able to stop. But I couldn't stay silent either. "You didn't just mess up, Jess," I said, still staring at the dark television screen. "You built a web of lies so you could keep things hidden from me. Not to protect me. Not because you had to. But because it was easier for you." She flinched. I didn't mean it to be cruel, but it was the truth. And she knew it. "I didn't want to make it a big deal," she murmured. "I figured if I told you, you'd get upset. And it just didn't seem worth the fight." And there it was. Not worth the fight. That was the part that truly stung. Not because I love conflict. God knows I avoid it when I can. But because in a marriage, honesty should always be worth it. The moment you decide that honesty is optional, that silence is safer, that's when the foundation starts to rot. "I would have given you access," I said. "Gladly. You just had to ask." "I know," she replied. "I don't have an excuse." We sat there for a long time, saying nothing. Just two people who used to know each other better than anyone else, now trying to figure out what they still shared. And maybe that's the part one can't stop thinking about. The slow unraveling of what I thought we had. This wasn't about catching her cheating or discovering some dark, explosive secret. It was quieter than that. Smaller. But in some ways, even more painful. She lied with a smile. Did things behind gestures of affection. Borrowed my phone and thanked me sweetly, knowing the whole time she didn't need to. It was calculated. Sustained. And I can't pretend I'm okay with it. I told her I needed space. Not in a dramatic, storming out kind of way. Just space to breathe. To think without her shadow lingering over every thought. She nodded. said she understood. That was a few days ago. Since then, I've started changing my passwords. Not out of spite, but because I need to rebuild some boundaries for myself. I never realized how vulnerable I'd left myself, not just technologically, but emotionally. I gave her every ounce of trust one had. And now, I need to figure out how much of it I can recover. I'm not saying we're heading for divorce, but I'm not saying we're fine either. We're in that space people don't talk about much, the middle. The uncomfortable place between betrayal and forgiveness. Between staying and leaving. And I don't know how long we'll be here. All I know is, I want honesty in my marriage. I want to look at the person I come home to and not have to wonder if she's hiding something behind her smile. Because once that doubt settles in, it doesn't just go away. It waits. And it watches. Now that you've heard my story, I have to ask, how would you feel if someone you loved crossed a line like this? Would you be able to forgive them? Or would the trust be too damaged to repair? What would you do in my shoes? I'd really like to know your thoughts. If you felt something during this journey, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know I'm not alone in this, that there are people out there who understand, who care, and who are walking this difficult road with me.